You've heard of Charles Manson, but I bet you haven't heard of Tony Costa. In 1968, young women were disappearing from Cape Cod, and Tony Costa seemed to be at the center of it. See, in his daily life, Tony Costa was a charming man. But Tony had another side of himself that he referred to as Corey. And Corey had a thirst for blood. He would lure his victims into this graveyard where he would promise them drugs, but instead would take their lives and dismember them. And since it was the 1960s and there were so many transient teens coming in and out of Cape Cod, it took police officers months to take any of these disappearances seriously. We know about his victims Patricia Walsh, Marian Wysocki, Susan Perry, and Sydney Monson, but there's potentially 4 others. And you can read all about Tony Costa in Helltown, Casey Sherman's new book. It's a great end of summer read, really putting you at the heart of coastal New England during the hippie movement, including all the love, drugs, and murder that took place. Let's talk about the shocking discovery that actually led to the release of Adnan Syed yesterday. As a recap, Adnan was convicted of killing his girlfriend, Hae Min Lee, in 1999, but the evidence was not very convincing. And now it's come out that one of the detectives on the case, Bill Ritz, was actively hiding information on 2 other suspects in the case. One of these suspects actually told someone that they were very upset with Hae Min Lee around the time of the murder and that they were going to, quote, make her disappear. And detectives knew full well about this, but it never made it to trial. Now it's also come out that one, if not both of these suspects have relevant criminal history, one was accused of SA and one is in jail for SA. And the evidence that the whole trial against Adnan hinged on was the fact that a person Adnan wasn't even really friends with came forward and said that Adnan did it, and cell phone records, which in 1999 were not really reliable. And let's not forget that the prosecutors really relied on the fact that Adnan was Muslim to accuse him and put him in jail, basically saying that the fact that he was dating in high school brought so much shame on his family that after she broke up with him, he had no choice but to murder her. 30 days to decide if they want to retry the case, but for now, Adnan is a free man. Some of you guys wanted more context on this case after I made this video, so don't worry, I read about this case so you don't have to. So this is Seth Welsh and Tatiana Fusari, and they're conservative Christian parents from Michigan who in 2018 let their 10-month-old daughter starve to death, and apparently didn't think there would be any consequences for that. In a pretty ridiculous 911 call, Tatiana called 911 at 10 a.m. the morning after she put her daughter down at 3:30 p.m., saying that she was unresponsive and she thought she was dead. But she also tells the 911 operator that she called her lawyer before calling the 911 operator, which is so sus. Also, who puts their baby down at 3:30 p.m. and doesn't check on them until 10 o'clock the next morning? Seth, the dad, also was notorious for believing in survival of the fittest. He didn't think that children should be vaccinated because he thought everyone that wasn't strong enough should die. And he apparently didn't think that his daughter would grow up to be strong enough to work on their farm and therefore wasn't feeding her. Tatiana knew something was wrong with her daughter, but she refused to call a doctor because she didn't trust the medical institution and for religious purposes. Anyways, both of them got life in prison, Seth without parole, and Tatiana has to do at least 25 years. Also, this is what their faces looked like when they found out that for starving a baby, you get life in prison. Have you ever wondered how accurate progression photos are? Progression photos are what detectives use on people that went missing years and years ago to kind of guess what they would look like today. So I'm going to show you some photos of missing children, what their progression photo looked like, and what they actually looked like when they were found. And if you're new to my page, I do all sorts of true crime and ghost stories, so make sure you're following along. So here's the first one. Here's 2 kids that went missing when they were children. And here's what detectives guessed they would look like as they got older. But here's what they actually looked like when they were found. As you can tell, like the hair color is wrong, general face shape is kind of right. I guess on the little boy it's more accurate, but these look like pretty much completely different people. So here's another one. Here's a baby that went missing. And this is what detectives thought he might look like when he got older, and granted, it's so hard to do this on babies. As you can tell, he doesn't really look anything like what his progression photo looked like when he was eventually found, but this little girl below has some similar features to what they thought she would look like as she got older. I'm so happy that this group of kids got found, but it's also proof that you need to find kids as quickly as possible because they just start looking so different so quickly. So there's this Reddit thread right now that says, I worked in a California state prison for 20 years and these are some of my paranormal experiences. And the stories in this thread are legitimately terrifying. But the scariest one is probably that one night a guard was down in solitary confinement counting all of the prisoners in each cell, just making sure that all 28 prisoners were accounted for. Each prisoner was supposed to have the appropriate paperwork filled out for them, but he noticed that there was one extra prisoner with no paperwork filled out. So the guy goes back to his station and calls his supervisor to ask about this unregistered prisoner. But the supervisor said no one should be in that cell. So the guard quickly runs back to the cell, but by that point, the mysterious prisoner is no longer there. And then he goes on to say that other guards had the same thing happen to them too. And if you've had any paranormal experiences, make sure you email me for a chance to be featured on my podcast. I keep seeing a lot of online discourse about the new Netflix Jeffrey Dahmer show and if it's actually exploitative, so let's take a little deeper look. Recently, it came out that one of Jeffrey Dahmer's victims' siblings learned that the show was coming out when everyone else did. Her name's Rita Isbell and her brother was Errol Lindsay, and they use her likeness and name in the show pretty explicitly. Rita was known pretty publicly at the time for her outburst during the Jeffrey Dahmer trial, and you can see here, the show makes no bones about using her exact likeness and outburst to profit, and Rita is not partaking in any of the profit shares of this show. Personally, and this is just me, I also think the show makes a very specific choice by casting Evan Peters as Jeffrey Dahmer. Evan has a really specific online fan base of young girls who idolize the psychotic characters he plays. So it's not shocking to me that people are watching this show and tweeting insanities like this. The show is #1 on Netflix right now, meaning it's one of the most watched shows in the whole world. So I can't imagine being a victim's family member because it's everywhere. And though both Evan Peters and the show's creator Ryan Murphy have come out and said that they didn't want the show to be about Jeffrey Dahmer, they wanted it to be about the victims, there's not really a lot being done right now for the victims or their families. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments if you've seen it. If you thought Blonde did Marilyn wrong, wait till you hear this. Did you know that a man bought the crypt above Marilyn Monroe so that he could be buried face down on top of her? I cover a lot of dark and true crime stories on this page, and this is one of the worst I've ever heard. His name is Richard Poncher, and he bought the space above Marilyn from her ex-husband, Joe DiMaggio. Apparently, after he died, his wife told the funeral director that his dying wish was to be placed in a certain position with Marilyn, and they did it. Never mind that Hugh Hefner also bought the spot next to Marilyn Monroe, even though he had never met her. He started Playboy when he used her naked pictures without her consent and launched the magazine into stardom. There's a lot of people right now saying, let Marilyn rest, let her rest, leave her life alone. Well, the truth of the matter is she can't, because for the rest of eternity she's surrounded by predatory men and that she did not ask to be placed anywhere near. This is the time I was almost abducted by a serial killer. In February of 2012, I went to go visit my grandfather's grave for his birthday. His death was a pretty hard thing for me to process as he only died in March of 2011, so it was all still pretty new to me. I was kneeling in front of his grave crying and thinking to myself, when all of a sudden I looked up and see a man running at me full speed from the woods in front of me. I was able to get myself to my truck pretty quickly before he got to me, but by the time I got in the truck, he was only about 50 feet away. I got in my car before he could get to me and locked the doors, much to his displeasure. He threw his hands up as if he had lost a football game. I started my truck and started driving out as fast as I could, but not before I passed him. I didn't break eye contact with him the entire time I was driving past, so I got a really good look at him. So cut to a few years later, I'm pretty bored at work, so I download this random app that has a bunch of paranormal, UFO, cryptid, and serial killer stories on it. And as I'm browsing through stories, I come across one that makes my heart absolutely drop. There was a photo of a man I recognized very well, Israel Keyes, who was most known for murdering an underage girl in Alaska, dismembering her, and throwing the pieces of her body in a lake. He would bury kill kits in places long before he ever committed the crimes. He had been killing for a few years, to the point where no one really knew what his actual death toll was. And he would eventually go on to take his own life in prison. At the end of this book I read about him, they mentioned his favorite places to abduct people: public parks and cemeteries. I often wonder if he left any kill kits in that cemetery. You were fast, Israel, but I was faster. So there may have been a fake juror in the Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial, and Amber's legal team is trying to have the whole verdict thrown out because of this alleged fake juror. According to recent reports, the juror number 15 that showed up the day of the trial is not the same one they vetted to be in the jury. And they're thinking this is true because the juror they selected was born in 1945, but the one that showed up was much, much younger looking. A person born in 1945 would be almost 80 years old, and the person that showed up was apparently in their maybe late 40s. I know a lot of people are wishing that this trial would just be over forever, but I'm curious to see if this actually gets everything thrown out. The more I learn about this Georgia Guidestone bombing, the weirder it gets. Yesterday at 4 a.m., authorities said that the Georgia Guidestones were damaged in an explosion, which destroyed one of the pillars. And if you don't know, the Guidestones were built in 1980 by a man using a fake name and are referred to as America's Stonehenge. They feature a guide to humanity written in 8 different languages, which I'm gonna get to in a sec. But then it was announced that it was actually a lightning strike, which this is the dimmest lightning strike I've ever seen, if that's the case. But conspiracy theorists have long been obsessed with the Guidestones because of the weird writings on them. The guide to humanity includes maintaining humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature and guiding reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity, which isn't so much a guide to humanity as it is eugenics. But the weirdest part of all of this is on the pillar that was destroyed by the explosion, it says that there is a time capsule placed 6 feet below this spot, and it's supposed to be opened on, and then no date. The rest of the pillars were actually demolished yesterday, but do we think someone was trying to get to the time capsule? Also, what could have been inside of it? Okay, so we have video evidence now that the Georgia Guidestones were not taken out by lightning. In this video that was just released, you can see a person running over and placing an explosive there and running away. What's even crazier is 4 days before this happened, this meme was shared on Truth Social, which is Trump's social media platform, of him taking out the Georgia Guidestones with an explosive. We also know that on the pillar that was destroyed, it said that there was a time capsule 6 feet below that spot. What did I say? The more we learn about it, the weirder it gets. Have you ever played this terrifying sleepover game? It starts like this. You and your friend must write down your name, first, middle, last, on a piece of paper, and then prick your finger and dot the piece of paper. Then you have to go around your entire house, turning off every light and every electronic. Then you have to stand in front of a closed wooden door and put the piece of paper down in front of it. Then you must also light a candle and place it on top of the paper. You need to knock on the door 22 times, with the last knock falling at midnight, and then blow out the candle. And then you've summoned the Midnight Man. There's not much known about the Midnight Man, and the only instruction is to not allow yourself to be caught. Have you ever wondered how accurate police sketches are? I'm gonna show you a couple police sketches, and then we're gonna see what the people looked like when they were actually caught. And I cover all sorts of true crime and spooky stuff on this page, so make sure you follow along. Starting with this one. So this was a man who SA'd a minor, and this was the description that she gave to the police. And as you can see, this is really close. He has the big glasses that go up over his eyebrows, broad nose, really round face. Even the hairline is pretty similar. This is a woman who stole a baby from a maternity ward. And she was actually caught 10 hours after the sketch was released because she looks almost identical to it. So the witness who gave the description to the police officer for this one was actually intoxicated when he saw her. But that person basically got it identically correct. You can see her wispy bangs, super round face, the way that her hair comes down over the sides of her face. Even her eyebrow shape is perfect. These sketches were all done by a woman named Lois Gibson, who holds the Guinness World Record for most successful police sketch artist. She helped solve over 1,000 crimes in her 30-year career. This is the story of the girl who was kidnapped twice by the same man. Jan Broberg was just 12 years old the first time she was taken by her neighbor. His name was Robert Berchtold, and he was an expert manipulator. Leading up to the kidnapping, he had convinced her parents that she needed to sleep in the same bed as him for therapy. He had even convinced both her mother and her father to sleep with him. One day in 1974, Berchtold picked up Jan to take her horseback riding, but instead he took her to Mexico. While they were there, he convinced her that she was an alien and needed to conceive his child in order to save the human race. And because she was a child, she believed him. The abuse carried on until Jan was 16 and realized that he had been lying to her this entire time. But now she's telling her story because she's an executive producer on the Peacock show A Friend of the Family. Not only do I love this because the story will be told in a way that's approved by Jan, but it also means that she gets to profit from the show in a way that most true crime survivors don't get to. Let me know if you plan on watching. Nothing could have prepared me for the end of this story. So when I was little, I used to always complain about a scratching noise coming from the room next to me. My dad actually converted the guest bedroom next to my room into a home office, and I was never allowed in there. He was a really busy man. One night, I was laying in bed, unable to sleep, when I thought I heard a small sob come from his office. I could faintly make out the sound of a woman crying, but I knew I wasn't allowed to go in there. And honestly, at that point, I was kind of too afraid to anyways. The next day, I told my dad what I had heard, and he told me it was probably just a bad dream. But that didn't make any sense to me because I knew what I had heard. My dad spent the entire day in his office that day. I didn't see him come out once. The next night, I waited until my father was asleep, and I did what I knew I shouldn't do. I went into his office. And when I opened the door, there were no books, there was no desk, there wasn't even a single chair. Just scratched into the walls a million times. Help me.
Just one thing that we have in common, neither of us will be missed. Saint Bernard sits at the top of the driveway. You always said how you love dogs.
If you've ever seen this man, you may be cursed. So around 2009, a man by the name of Jacob Fairchild was doing a human experiment in an old insane asylum. The experiment was to see if the subjects could stay awake for an entire month playing a computer game that he designed. But the people that were doing this experiment were not heard from afterwards. Jacob was apparently losing his mind while conducting this experiment. He started wearing a mask covered in eyes, calling himself the Timekeeper. This is an image that a former staff member had drawn of him. Eventually, legend has it, he went so crazy he locked everyone inside the facility and burned it down, killing everyone, including himself. But as the place was burning down, he threw himself over a computer server that had the game on it, and it was the only thing not damaged by the fire. Recently, it's been reported that the game Jacob created has been randomly resurfacing on people's computers. To this day, 2 of the teens that reported playing the game have died, 3 have gone missing, and 1 reported seeing this person upon starting the game. And no one who has ever played the game has won. This was the last photo ever taken on Chelsea McPherson's camera before she went missing. So just outside of Seattle in 2004, high school junior Chelsea McPherson's teachers noticed something was wrong with her. For one, it appeared like she just entirely stopped sleeping. She apparently mentioned to a friend that every time she fell asleep, she said that she saw the image of a clown that she referred to as Mr. Bubbles. Her English teacher also reported that she was constantly looking outside of the classroom window as if something was out there watching her. Police evidence gathered after her disappearance showed that her notebooks were full of sketches like this with what police now believe to be Mr. Bubbles. October 4th, 2004 was the last night anyone saw Chelsea. The last text sent from her phone was to her friend saying, "I'm tired of being afraid." And now, there's something scary about this photo. Once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. So this is a bunch of linen workers in Ireland around the year 1900. And everything looks normal until you realize that there's a hand not attached to a person crawling over the shoulder of this woman. Let me know in the comments if you saw it right away. So more and more sightings of the Smiling Man have been reported recently. For those who don't know, the Smiling Man is a very tall, odd-looking man who wears this creepy grin and is often caught trying to steal children, as was the case with a young girl named Linda. Years ago, Linda lived in West Virginia, and one night she awoke to strange sounds in her bedroom. She rolled over to go back to sleep, but what she saw in her hallway was a tall, dark, shadowy figure. Linda closed her eyes in fear, and when she reopened them, he was standing right above her. She screamed and he disappeared, but recently there's been more reports of sightings. Legend has it, if you close your eyes at night and think the words "Smiling Man, Smiling Man, Smiling Man" over and over again, he'll appear. Would you try? The story of Jean Dulac and his evil doll. So in the early 1900s, Jean Dulac was one of the most famous ventriloquists in all of vaudeville. His doll not only looked like it was speaking on its own, but it appeared to move on its own and also had a voice completely different from Jean's. This confused a lot of his fans, but they mostly chalked it up to his talent. But others felt there was something slightly sinister about the doll. Reports that the doll was sometimes caught speaking even when it wasn't on Jean's hand. Missy Waters, a vaudevillian dancer and Jean's lover, claimed that one night she walked into Jean's room to find the doll off of his hand and Jean on the other side of the room curled up in a ball crying. She said a voice was coming from the doll speaking Latin, and it clearly was not Jean. The more Jean used the doll, the sicker he got too, and within a few years of his success, he was on his deathbed. And apparently right before he died, he asked to make a call to Missy. According to her, on that phone call, Jean said it was the devil inside of the doll. He said that he had bought the doll off a man traveling through town with the understanding that if he let the devil live inside the doll, he would have all the fame and fortune he desired. His last words were, "Do not let anyone have this doll after I die." The whereabouts of the doll are currently unknown.
You were amazing. You were unforgettable. You were fun as hell. And you were a goddamn masterpiece.
In 1912, a young boy went missing. And when he was finally reunited with his mother, it seemed like it was not the same boy. So 4-year-old Bobby Dunbar disappeared by a lake on a family vacation in 1912. The only clue found was his hat, which led many to believe he had been kidnapped. The next year, in 1913, a man is seen traveling with a boy that looks very similar to Bobby. He was arrested, but he insisted the boy was not Bobby. He was a boy named Bruce Anderson. But the police didn't listen and returned the boy to Bobby Dunbar's mother. At first, the mother is not convinced the boy is Bobby Dunbar, but she claims that the boy has similar birthmarks to Bobby, so it must be the same child. But when she sends him to play with the neighborhood kids, they don't recognize Bobby either. The boy lived with the Dunbars for the rest of his life, went on to have a family of his own, and passed away in 1966. And almost 100 years after this took place, Bobby Dunbar's granddaughters insisted a DNA test be done. And it proved what they feared to be true. The boy was Bruce Anderson. He shared no DNA with the Dunbar family. It turns out part of the reason he was not reunited with his real mother was there was a rumor that Bruce Anderson's mother was a prostitute and was not viewed favorably by the police. For more creepy history, make sure you're following along. You'll never look at a mall Santa the same way after hearing this story. So this photo was taken around 1920 in a Christmas fair happening outside of Boston. The young child in this photo is Alberta Porter, the daughter of Robert Porter, who was posed to be Boston's next mayor. Apparently, this Santa had set up around the corner from the rest of the fair and was not visible from the rest of the fair. Robert and his daughter actually didn't even see the Santa until they were walking home. The line to see Santa inside of the fair was way too long, so when Alberta saw this Santa, she started crying and begging her dad to take a photo with him. So this photo was taken, and afterwards, the Santa asked if Alberta wanted to go on a short ride on the donkey. And she starts crying and begging her father again, so he agrees. But Alberta never returned. An hour went by and Santa still hadn't brought her back. Robert ran into the fair to ask an employee how long the donkey rides typically last, but the employee seemed really confused. There was no Santa with donkey rides at this fair. The employee pointed to the Santa who had a long line of children out in front of him and said that was the only Santa at the fair. Alberta was never found, and Robert actually dropped out of politics to spend his entire life and savings on finding her and the man who took her, and never did. This is why I can't do Ring cameras. So this photo was taken at 3 a.m. on a Ring camera just outside of Spokane, Washington on March 17th, 2017. Which, as if that's not scary enough, the same man was seen photographed on 13 other Ring cameras in the area, all at 3 a.m. At first, police believed it was an attack orchestrated by a group of people, but a closer look made them realize it was the same man. One witness claimed she was awoken at 3 a.m. to what sounded like a baby crying, and that's when she got the alert that something was seen on her Ring camera. She also claimed that since this happened, she's felt like someone's been watching her. This man was never found by police, but a user on Reddit based in Chicago recently posted that she also saw something weird on her Ring camera. She said her and her neighbors all got an alert at 3 in the morning that someone wearing a mask was seen at their door.
Congratulations, viewer. You have been chosen. You are now part of the hunt. There is now someone tracking you at all times. Do not let them find you. Do not let them get you. Do not try to hide.
They won't like that.
The hunt will commence tonight. Good luck.
So Texas schools are starting to send parents DNA kits so that they'll be able to identify their children's bodies in emergencies. And parents are very understandably frustrated with this. For one, it kind of feels like a slap in the face after Uvalde, where nothing much was done to prevent a tragedy like that happening again. And instead of taking steps to prevent that from happening again, they're basically saying, hey, here's an ID kit so you can constantly worry about this happening to your child. Which also, a side note, but fingerprinting every child in Texas doesn't feel very individual freedom of them. Parents are also worried that this is going to bring up triggering conversations for their very young children. Mommy, why are you fingerprinting me? Well, baby, if you go to school and get blown to bits by a military-grade weapon, Mommy won't be able to see your face so good. But this way, if I'm able to recover part of your finger, I'll be able to know it's you. Oh, okay. This idea was actually cooked up in 2021 before the Uvalde tragedy, but the fact that this is a response at all is apocalyptic. You know how they say that kids can see ghosts that adults can't see? I think this video proves it. So look at this little girl. She's talking to someone who's off screen, but watch what happens. It seems like an invisible force tries to take that toy from her, and then watch again. She's still talking to something. And it appears to try to take the box from her again. And she says no. What do you think this is? This is why I don't trust clowns. So this is the only photographic evidence that we have of the night clown, or payaso de noche, a clown that terrorized southern Texas in the early 2000s. In 2002, an absurd amount of dogs went missing in Texas. Some communities said that every dog on the block was gone. So one night, this 6-year-old girl, Sarah Martinez, wanders into the woods looking for her lost dog. She was missing for hours, and when they finally found her, she was curled up in a ball crying, claiming that Payasa de Noche had eaten her dog. Many people in the community chalked it up to her being like a little kid with a wild imagination, but soon other kids in the area started complaining about this. This drawing was submitted by a 2nd grade teacher to evidence. Tons of kids started drawing pictures just like this, claiming that their dogs also had been eaten by Payasa de Noche. And just like Pennywise, this is not the first time that this clown had been seen. Other sightings happened just outside of Mexico City in the 90s, and more recently in San Diego, where this photo was snapped. You really need to make sure you're double checking your house at night. This story comes from a woman named Shannon who lived in Seattle. Shannon lived alone, but for months she was complaining about weird noises coming from inside her house at night. And sometimes she would wake up with bruises on her arms that had no explanation. Shannon would also come home from work to find things in her home were not the same as she left them. Like this one time she came home and saw sawdust all over her living room floor. So that's when she set up a camera and caught this image in her kitchen one night at midnight. Shannon was obviously terrified, so she called the police, who came to her house and tore up everything looking for clues as to who the intruder was. And that's when they found this hole behind her couch. And inside this hole was rope, tape, a lock of Shannon's hair, and a vial of her blood. Police said that it looked like someone had been living in this hole for months. Whoever this was never found, and Shannon has since moved homes, but every now and then she complains of a weird scratching noise at night. So there's actually talk now that artificial intelligence is going to get so good it will be able to design the most beautiful people on the planet. I've been using artificial intelligence for a while now, so I wanted to see if I could get it to design one of these people so you guys could see what I was talking about. I fed the bot key physical features that we typically associate with supermodels, and this is what it drew me. Bella Hadid, I think you're safe for now. But then I thought maybe my search terms were wrong, so I tried to type in something that was a little more clear for the bot, and yeah, not much better. I thought maybe it would do a better job with men or different skin tones. I think eventually these bots are going to get really good, but for right now, I think supermodels are safe. This photo is of the Cincinnati Crawler. It was taken by a family who caught him in their home in 1974, but he escaped shortly afterwards. So in 1974, the Johnson family in Cincinnati noticed a couple weird things happening in their home. The 14-year-old daughter, Claire, would complain about seeing glowing eyes outside of her window at night. And then one night, the youngest son, Timmy, was laying in bed in the dark when he felt the family dog jump up onto his bed. But when he went to go pet it, it was not the dog. It was the Crawler, who police still believe was responsible for the disappearance of 4 other boys in the area. Some believe that he was an escaped convict, while others actually believe that he was the victim of human experiments happening in the area that may have been conducted by the family's dad. Claire snapped this photo of him before he escaped, but he was never found since. This story keeps me up at night, and it's a real one. So in the early 90s, a woman named Jerry went to a psychotherapist named John Mack because she was having recurring nightmares of UFOs. Then one night, her 2-year-old son started screaming in terror in his room. She ran in to check on him, and he claimed that owl monsters were touching his legs. And when she asked where the owl monsters were now, he claimed that they were in a boat in the sky. So Jerry starts thinking that maybe her family is being visited by aliens. She kind of brushed it off at first, but then one night her daughter has this experience. She was practicing reading for school, and she had to time herself in 10-minute intervals and see how far she could read. So she's timing herself for 10 minutes, marking how far she read. Timing herself for 10 minutes, marking. Timing herself for 10 minutes, and then she looks up and an hour has gone by. There's 50 minutes of time she can't account for, which apparently is kind of common in people who have been visited by aliens. I talk more about this story and other alien encounters on my podcast this week. And we hear a story from someone whose grandfather was visited by aliens in the 60s.
Một người đã mong cả thế giới sánh đôi với tình yêu mới ngày em đẹp nhất trong.
This is why you have to be careful who you let into your Halloween parties. So this is a photo of who police believed was a guest at a Halloween party in Rochester, New York in the 1940s. The party was being thrown by Jack and Amelia Layton, and they actually noticed that this guest was outside of the party watching the guests through a window. The report claims that Amelia believed the guest was her friend Jan, who tended to go above and beyond for Halloween, creating very scary costumes. So she let this person in believing it was her friend Jan. But then 20 minutes later, Jan shows up, and that guest could not be found anywhere. So Amelia starts running around the party asking everyone if they knew who that guest was, and no one had recognized that person. So she goes into her daughter's room, who was playing while the party was happening. And the police report states that the only thing there left of Amelia's daughter was a bloody shoe. 4 other reports of this guest being at parties that night were called into police, and all of them resulted in missing children's cases. The identity of this person has never been found, and none of the kids have been found either. This photo is of the Cincinnati Crawler. And this is a photo of my sibling's cat. He was so excited to see me, he got his head caught in the hole. Okay. Have you ever wondered how accurate police sketches are? I'm going to show you a sketch, then I'm going to show you the person that was arrested, and we're going to see. So this is the police sketch for the man wanted in the Delphi murder case, one of the most high-profile unsolved murders right now. For those who don't know, in 2017, 2 young girls, Abby Williams and Libby German, were murdered while out for a walk in the woods. And a few days ago, this man, Richard M. Allen, was arrested as a suspect in the murders. And Richard looks so different from that sketch that here's actually a photo of him posing next to it, completely unnoticed. A better comparison would actually be this photo that one of the girls posted to Snapchat, where she was able to get video and audio of the man before they were murdered. Details pertaining to the arrest are still under wraps, but I could definitely see how that man would be this man, more so than the police sketch. There's been an uptick in siren head sightings recently. Things are about to get bad. So this past week, just outside of Birmingham, Alabama, 2 girls were walking through the woods when they heard what sounded like an emergency siren. They were terrified and started running, but then they heard what they told police sounded like their names coming through a speaker system. Now, from other siren head sightings in the past, we know that he uses the siren to lure people out of their homes, and that by the time you hear your name, it's too late. The girls made it out of the woods, but not before one turned around to snap this photo. Siren Head hasn't been seen in over 20 years, but it looks like he may be back. What's worse is that other teens in the area have complained about hearing their names being read through a speaker in the middle of the night, waking them up. And what we know from experience is by the time one person sees him, he is deep inside the community. This is why babysitting always freaks me out. So in 2014, Sarah DeWalt was babysitting for a new family that had just moved into her neighborhood in Ohio. The family consisted of 2 young children under 10, but when Sarah showed up that night, the parents kept talking as if they had 3 children. There were 3 sets of pajamas laid out, there were 3 bowls of ice cream on the counter, but the family clearly only had the 2 kids. So that night, Sarah and the kids are winding down watching a movie when all of a sudden Sarah starts hearing noises in the house. There were footsteps shuffling like someone else was there, and she had this overwhelming feeling that she was being watched. So she gets up to check on the noise, but then the kids turn to her and say, "Oh, that's Bonnie, don't bother her." Sarah leaves it because she's freaked out, but then later that night she goes to check the nanny cam and she sees this image captured in the hallway. She stayed up until the parents came home, but she never went back after that. Have you ever wondered how accurate police sketches are? I'm going to show you some sketches and then the actual people, and we're going to see if we can see a resemblance. Starting with this guy. So this was the sketch of a suspect in a shooting of a rabbi in Miami. And apparently it was supposed to resemble this guy right here. So this is a sketch of a guy who was holding 2 women at gunpoint in a robbery. And the crazy thing is it actually led to the arrest of this man. This one is my personal favorite. So this was actually drawn by a witness after they watched this person steal money out of a cash register. And the release of the sketch actually led to the arrest of this person right here. I actually think the eyes look kind of similar. But what do you think? Do you see the resemblances? Can you tell a place has a dark history just from looking at it? I'm going to be showing you Zillow listings from homes with haunted pasts, and we're gonna see. And some of you may have already guessed it, but this first one is Jeffrey Dahmer's childhood home. This is part of a new series, so make sure you're following along. So Jeffrey Dahmer's family lived here from 1968 to the early 80s. And though it's been remodeled, this is the home he was raised in. Most of his crimes took place in his apartment complex when he was an adult, but his first crime actually took place in this house, right in this living room. It was the murder of a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks. Stephen's remains were actually scattered on the property of his home without his parents ever knowing. The person who owns the home now actually says that the house has no bad vibes, but I just don't know if I buy that. Let me know if there's other homes you want to see. Have you ever wondered how accurate police sketches are? So this is a police sketch in one of the most high-profile murder cases happening right now. He's wanted for the 2017 murders of Libby German and Abby Williams, who were killed while out for a walk in Delphi, Indiana. And this is Richard Allen, who was just arrested as a suspect in the case. In another video, I actually showed you this sketch here, which was the first police sketch made in the investigation. And Richard actually looks so dissimilar to that photo that this is actually a picture of him posing next to it and no one noticed. One of the craziest things about this case is right before the girls were murdered, they actually captured this image on one of their phones, and this is who police believe is the murderer. Specific details on the case remain under wraps. I mean, cops won't even release how the girls died, but I can definitely see it. What I'm about to show you is the photo Katrina Whalen captured on her Ring camera the other night. So Katrina lives alone down a long country road in West Texas. And 3 nights ago, she invited a friend over for dinner at 7 p.m. But 7 rolls around and her friend's not there. And then 8 rolls around and her friend is still not there. And that's when Katrina starts to hear footsteps outside. Slow at first, but then it starts to sound like someone is running full speed at her house. Thinking it's her friend, she goes to open the door, but no one is there. So Katrina calls her friend, but then when the other line picks up, it's just heavy breathing. And then laughing. She's really freaked out now, so she runs upstairs, but that's when she gets the notification that someone is at her front door. And this was that someone. Katrina is still alive to tell the tale, but there's been an uptick in Reddit users complaining in West Texas of hearing someone outside and then answering the door to see no one is there.